Welcome to our podcast. I'm Andy Murray, the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association, and today we're going to be talking about gaining value through project closure, which is a follow-up to a seminar that we held recently. Now, I'm joined by one of the speakers, Mark Sutton, the Elections Programme Manager from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Welcome, Andy. Yes, good to speak to you.
So what we'll do, before we sort of talk a bit about the theme of the seminar and follow up on some of the ideas and discussions that we had, I thought it'd be useful, Mark, to learn a little bit about you in terms of your background as to, your route through to becoming the Elections Programme Manager, because you never started off as a civil servant. So give us a potted history.
No, I didn't. Although the organisation I started working for was as close as you could get to be a government organisation. I started working with Royal Mail once I left university. I went in at a time when Royal Mail was looking to invest in automation quite significantly for the first time in its history. And so it was a really interesting place to cut my teeth as a project manager, which is where I was working for the 17 years I was there. So we basically put all the equipment in that was the first version of what's still being used today. So those code marks you have on the front of your envelopes, they're all machine readable versions of your address, and that's what the sorting machinery uses to make sure the mail gets to the right place. After I worked there for 17 years, I went to work for a local council for a year and a half at a time when there was a push for trying to make everything that people were receiving in terms of services electronically accessible. So supporting that work that the council was doing, so things like automated payments or online payments for the first time in the council's history, along with other things that we were trying to do. After that, I ended up working for quite a small training and consultancy company doing various things for various different organisations, all to do with change, project and programme management. So that really was the first time I dabbled in the truly private sector. The organisation I worked for was one of the very first training organisations set up in the country. But the person that set that up decided eventually, as we all do, that he wanted to retire. And so I ended up working for myself in pretty much the same space for 7 or 8 years before COVID came along. And because I was working for larger consultancy partners, if you like, picking up the crumbs that were falling off the table from the work they had, COVID made those crumbs no longer fall to the floor. And I had to look around elsewhere to find a way of paying the bills. And I looked across all the different sectors that were out there, and I thought, well, government always needs people. They don't seem to be closing down. There seems to be no difficulty there. Those services need to continue to be delivered. So I started applying for government jobs and ended up working in the elections team. And we look at all the ways in which elections are run, conducted, including preparation for them, things like registering to vote. And we, according to the government of the day, need to make changes to those things to fulfil the government's ambitions in those areas. And that all requires change. So good project and programme delivery. So I've been doing that for 5 years next month.
Brilliant. That's great, Mark. So we often discuss about whether sort of project program management skills are universal, can transfer between sectors and different types of projects and programs. But clearly your experience here is that you've made those transitions from, Royal Mail and then into, local authority, into private sector consulting work, and then sort of not quite full circle, but back into not-for-profit, but this time central government, and very different types of projects and programs too.
Yeah, and on top of that, in my spare time, not having had enough project and programme delivery while at work, I was lucky enough that I'd got experience of local authorities, experience of central government to some degree, and also experience of just how to do project and programme delivery, and saw an opportunity to set up a local secondary school for my district, where my son ended up attending, because otherwise he'd have to travel miles away to the allocated space that he was given to go to secondary school. So I actually founded a new school as well. But that was all, again, another change programme, but I did that in my spare time and I didn't get paid for that. But that was fun. That was great to be able to have those skills and be able to use them there too.
It reminds me of the old adverts in the 80s and 90s about the chap that liked the razor so much he bought the company. So you liked the idea of the project so much you you did it yourself. Yeah, brilliant. So thanks. Well, I'm sure we'll draw on some of those that sort of compare and contrast in this discussion around around project closure. So just as a reminder to listeners who were unable to make the seminar, we have a great highlights report capturing some of the discussions. But what we looked at was projects at various stages of their life cycle, several that were either closing or had closed, and just looked at the lessons that we could apply to make sure that we don't sort of grab defeat from the jaws of victory when we're going through those final stages. And some of the themes that we discussed when we we're going through it is the challenge, that it is a transition. There's a lot of uncertainty for some people on the project or program, and it is still an opportunity to get things wrong. The flip side of that is still an opportunity to deliver way more or to get additional benefits than you would otherwise sort of be anticipating. So to help us sort of get the conversation going, Mark, I'm going to quote from one of the things that you said that was captured by our report writer, which was, "Start early, don't wait until the formal closure phase." We were preparing nearly 2 years out. So when a snap general election was called in July 24, we were ready. So to give the listeners a little bit of context of your program then, and about your sort of lessons as to why being ready for closure sort of was beneficial for you.
Well, one of the things was that we were considered to be quite a fairly risky initiative within government circles. So that meant that we were under scrutiny. There is an organisation called NISTA, who are the sort of equivalent to Ofsted when it comes to project delivery across government. They come in and check, they kick the tires, make sure you're doing things right. And they came in and reviewed us quite early on back in 2022 and decided that we had some quite systemic difficulties, particularly not having enough project and program delivery professionalism in the program. And they started to signal us as of real concern. And it was clear that unless we dealt with those difficulties, that we wouldn't actually be able to close effectively. And for me, the journey towards closure started from the point we received their report with the recommendations within it, that we had to start putting some of those things right. We had to prove to NISTA that we were really changing what was an angry red rag rating into something that would look closer to green, so that when we got to the end of the journey and they did another review at the back end of the program life cycle, that we would be able to give them the confidence that we'd done everything that we said we would, and that we'd listen to them and, if you like, put in place their recommendations. So for me, it wasn't a case of a separate closure process at the back end of the life cycle. It was really a progressive movement towards that. We were trying to improve the circumstances within the program and looking how to manage it more effectively, because we knew we'd come under that scrutiny. And we still came under scrutiny yearly. They came in annually and reviewed us and saw that incremental progression in the right way. So that was one of the things that we were looking at, not leaving everything to the last moment. The other thing that was helpful for us was that we couldn't actually say to anybody, but we had to make some assumptions as to when we thought the government would go to the polls and ask the country whether it wanted to extend that government and in a general election. So we had to make a quite crunchy programme assumption about that, so that we knew what we were trying to work to. But it gave us a starting point. So if there was ever any intelligence that suggested there would be a different situation, and as you can imagine, when you have prime ministers changing, that does get you a little nervous. That we were ready for those and able to accommodate that within our thinking. Because one of the problems you've got is you don't know when the general election is going to happen. You know when it can, but you don't know for certain. So, but we did build that assumption, and we, as we got closer to it, and the intelligence showed us that maybe that wasn't going to be what realised, we were able to tailor the back end of the programme plan. But in effect, the money was always due to, if you like, finish the end of the financial year following the general election. And therefore, because the general election happened in July 2024, that gave us quite a bit of time to actually go through that closure process that those that have used project life cycles or models will be very aware of, that always seem to get tacked on the end of the delivery element of the program or project. So we were still able to do that, but we had a bit more time. If the election had been as late as it could be, delay, that would have shortened that time frame. So therefore, we were trying to get ahead of that in case that was the eventuality, and started that sort of final closure work quite early on in the last financial year.
That's fascinating. So your sort of closure activity was more dictated by the proximity to the end of a financial year than the budget for those activities per se, which is, I guess, requires a bit of agility and sort of fleet of foot to be ready for those. One of the things we also discussed was with reference to Tideway, which was one of the projects that we looked at, and the chair for the seminar, Roger Bailey, was the technical director for Tideway. But we explored sort of the, if you like, the distinction between a go live and then the subsequent closure. And often we might, or some might conflate the go live with the closure. And obviously closure activity is very different to, the handing over of an asset or the bringing into service of something. That said, when we think about go lives or bringing into service, one of the things we are quite good at, when I say we, projects people are quite good at, are doing things like rehearsals and sort of test events and so on. And I was fascinated because you didn't use that language, but you explained that as you were thinking of the closure activities, and in particular your Gate 5 review, to help you rehearse or to practice, you actually put yourself forward to be a reviewer of other GMPP projects going through that process. So I think it was a brilliant move, but it's a genius level of thinking. But talk us through that experience and what you took from that.
Yes, for me, it was a good opportunity to give some of my project delivery knowledge and expertise back to the government. So the government has this review scheme where they invite people that can to go and do reviews of other initiatives. So I'd already done a couple of earlier in lifecycle reviews and found it really interesting. I found it really interesting because not only could I offer something, an insight, but I also actually learned an awful lot about how other people do the equivalent to what I do. And sometimes they do it very differently, but they have exactly the same successful outcome. So it was fascinating to see how in different parts of government, people were trying to achieve the same ambitions, but they're doing it their way. So that was very helpful. But what I also realised was that as a sort of still relative newbie in the civil service, I'd not been on the end of a Gate 5 review. We were the first initiative within MHCLG to be subjected to such a review. And so it made sense to go and find out what the type of thing we'd be on the end of. So I thought I'd offer to go and do one to someone else. And suddenly realised when I was sitting in the middle of it, the type of questions that it made absolute sense to actually ask of those we were reviewing, and sitting there thinking, if I'm asking these questions of these people, this is the type of question we're going to be on the end of, and I need to be prepared for. So that was really quite helpful. It provided a lot of real clarity as to what I needed to come back and do in our programme and work with colleagues to achieve, so that we were ready when we were subjected to the same assessment.
Yeah, and so that prompted some changes or some additional things for you to work on, or is it more a case of sort of tidying up things you might have been doing anyway?
One of the areas it really made me think about was a couple of the initiatives that I'd seen. They were very much saying that they got a plan for closure, plan for handover of outstanding activities. So those activities that the programme or project vehicle were not going to be around to see through, but sort of those last little loose ends that need to be found a home. And there was talk about that they had a plan for that, but they weren't actually in that point where they had appointed somebody, assigned them to be the owner of the recipient of the baton that was going to be passed on in that relay race. And so I realised that one of the things we'd need to do is be absolutely clear what were the outstanding actions we would have at the end of the financial year when we would close, and had we identified the scope of those items, and had we assigned them to someone, had they agreed that they were taking that ownership on, so there was a seamless transition. We were quite fortunate in as much that, of course, we do change within a typically operationally organised hierarchical area. So often the person who owned the baton within the program was going to be the operational business as usual recipient of the baton once the program closed down. Now, that wasn't the case in all cases, but that was a significant number of instances for us. So that made things a little bit easier, but it meant we still had to talk to them and say, you understand that you're taking on this responsibility, and we will track that through the business as usual side of the department's work.
Yeah, great. So this sort of prompts a thought that I had on the day, but didn't necessarily want to ask a question or to suggest something that took us down a different route. But knowing your background, you said you went into a training and consulting organisation, and I know that during that time you were sort of closely associated with Prince 2, and some of our listeners will know that I was the lead author of the 2009 version of Prince 2, and then the most recent one as well. And in Prince 2, closure isn't just necessarily or something that could be a phase or a stage, at the end of the project's life cycle, but it also includes a process, a closure, closing the project process, which has a number of checks and things. And I've always felt that it's probably the most undervalued of the processes in the Prince 2 method. And even such things as you just said, thinking about that operational handover, who's going to own things, making sure that the project team itself isn't providing perhaps operational or maintenance type support unbeknown to them and to others. So when eventually they step down, things stop working, or it's sort of it's not recognised that support is in place. But also around the premature close, and the value of, if you have to close early, how do you make sure you get the most value? We often use the term salvage. How can you salvage, the what you've delivered to date and make the most value? But has that sort of thinking come into your work? Was you preparing for that?
Absolutely. As a checklist, yes, absolutely. I had that at the back of my head. Because I'm talking mainly to non-project professionals. They're the colleagues that I work with on a day-to-day basis. I have policy colleagues, people that develop the policy that government wants to see realised. I have people who are building digital services that citizens can access, like the Register to Vote service or the ability to apply for a postal vote online. So those people do not necessarily use the same type of language that you and I would use as project professionals. And actually, even just understanding that the program is a temporary thing and business as usual continues, then having that understanding even sometimes has been a challenge. So having a checklist that talks about things like follow-on action recommendations. I learned not to use that phrase very, very quickly, even though that's something that makes complete sense to me as a project delivery professional. So I would go and talk to them in language they would understand as to the equivalent to that. Look, here's a whole set of batons that the program will not finish, and we need to find someone next in the relay race to take them. And we said we think it's you, and you're going to be doing that without program support because the program's going to close. The funding will no longer be there, and you need to be aware that now is moving into your business as usual responsibilities. So talking that type of thing through, understanding there's a need to have an end project program report in our case, where you draw up what it is you've actually achieved against what was the original target ambition, saying where you've had difficulties, maybe where you've learned some lessons from that, and what you're doing to plough that into the next initiative that you're going to be asked to deliver. All of those things, because I am also, I have to say, autistic, and anything that gives me a nice clear framework or a hit list, a checklist, I find useful. And I've learned that I can carry around, I'm really boring, I can carry around Prince 2 manual content in my head, risk management manual content in my head. I can cite them and even the page numbers. So having that as a checklist at the back of my head was really, really useful. I was drawing on that and thinking, have I ticked that box? Have I ticked that one? Have I ticked that one? Absolutely.
And of course, for those people working in the civil service now, there's the Teal book, which provides quite a very similar, if you like, checklist, process-based view of project activities that if you can't carry it in your head like you can, others can go
Yeah,
and look on the
absolutely.
.gov.uk site. So,
Yeah,
which is a
absolutely.
great,
But
great bit of
unfortunately, the
work.
Till book was a little bit late for us, but there was equivalent documentation that was being shared across the whole of government from the government office. So I drew on that and used their language, that language, rather than what I've learned in Prince 2 or in MSP as such. Sorry, managing a
Yeah.
successful program.
Yeah, and the irony being that Prince 2 started life as a crown copyright product. So the other thing I want to draw on then is the highlight report from the event. The report writer sort of flags sort of follow-on discussions, as we're talking about, sort of follow-on recommendations, and there were three that were highlighted. So I thought it'd be useful for us just to pick on some of those and all three of those, and help the listeners think about some follow-on ideas that they may want to take on as well. So the first one is the really aligned to to the work that you have done, which is the act early. So how can we sort of, do you think we can institutionalize or bring into regular practice some of the things that you were doing, which is before you got towards that closure stage of your project, before even the go live, and then thinking about the work to then finally hand it over and stand the project or program down?
I think to some degree you have to be the conscience of the project or the program. As I said, and it's typical for us as project delivery professionals, you're always working with technical experts, and they don't necessarily think of things as a project. They see that they're contributing to something, or they may not even see they're contributing, but they know they're involved in some way. And they're very often focused on the immediate, the now, the imminent. And I found that I've had to remind people that it's okay, for example, at the front end of the programme for us, you have to take legislation into Parliament to get changes to how people are expected to behave in law in order for elections to be run differently. And everybody gets excited about taking things through Parliament because it's into involvement with politicians, and it's quite exciting stuff. But I have to remind everybody, after you've done that, we've got to implement it all. We've got to deploy it all. We've got to make sure that it actually is going to be ready for people at the time that we are saying to politicians that it'll be ready. And so acting as the conscience and reminding people while they're very excited about the now, look longer term, this is always happening within the context of the longer term. So I found one way to get people to think about things early enough is to remind them about the painful back end, that this is going to have to be implemented, and it has to be implemented by specific dates. One of the things we have in elections is that we have elections at a predefined schedule. We have local elections every so many years in May, and therefore, if we're going to introduce changes in time for those, that is an immutable time frame, and we've got to hit it. So it's always reminding people that there is that back end element, and that therefore changes the context in which people are thinking about the now.
So that's a mindset shift more than sort of process and sort of life cycle type checks that we would have. Yeah, but I do wonder though whether there's also an opportunity in when we're going through our gate reviews, one of the early gate reviews, to say, even if it's just an outline, is there already an outline forming of the the handover and closure activities?
Well, yes. I mean, if you follow good MSP, it reminds you that you want to be thinking about that really from the outset. You've got to be thinking back end as well at the front end. So as part of your planning, you're planning from the word go, and some of those behaviours or processes or management practices you're going to put in place into your program must enable you to get through the back end of the program too. So things like your information, how are you going to set up your information management so that at the end of the program journey, it's easy to archive information or share it onto those that need it next. So yes, there's always that thinking at the front end about how you're going to handle the back end.
Yeah, and of course, even things like the sort of project program board representation can help with that. So if you've got someone from the permanent organisation sitting on your program board or project board that's going to be the recipient or whatever it is that you're delivering, you'll always get that bias towards how you're going to hand it over, how you're going to close it down, how you're going to make sure that everything works when the temporary project organisation has gone.
Yeah, and thinking about what are the internal approvals that are needed, and making sure you're giving yourself enough notice of those internal approvals. You built them into your planning. One of the things that government is encouraged to do is think about what's called an integrated assurance approvals plan, where you ask what assurance activities are going to happen or need to happen upon the pieces of work that you're doing in your program. So people who have a technical responsibility are confident in what you're doing technically, but also the need to go and get approvals, for example, budgetary approval, or maybe even things like a closure approval. So you understand what those approval mechanisms are up front, and you build those into your planning so that actually they don't become a stumbling block when you meet them, and they're not a surprise to you.
So moving on to the second of the follow-on ideas or discussion points was the thinking about well-being of the project or program team, because a number of things that happen. So often stress levels tend to rise whenever there's a big event like a handover or a gate approval point. A bit like big sporting events as well. Then there's the post-event lull, and that can people can feel a little bit deflated because the energy drops, and then there's also the anxiety for many in terms of what comes next, particularly project people on temporary assignments will be wondering about their next role. So what's been your experience from that sort of well-being, mental health aspect of the closure phase?
There's been 2 or 3 things that have struck me as we've gone through the sort of the transition from the program that we spoke about at the webinar and the program we're now doing for the current government. First thing I need to make clear, though, is I've been quite fortunate that the project delivery professionals that we grew as to our community of support on the electoral integrity program has been carried forward into the new program. But there was, you're right, some uncertainty as to whether that would happen. Certainly, the first thing that I noticed is that a lot of the people in my own program team that are project delivery professionals, they're still relatively entry level. I would say they're still new to the profession, and they weren't necessarily used to what you and I might be used to in terms of projects being interesting, because you have a plan and you look to follow that plan and you compare your progress against the plan, but the plan is never the actual outcome that occurs. It's the one that doesn't occur, and there's all sorts of deviations that you have to deal with and resolve along the way, and that's what makes it the interesting roller coaster ride that it is as a profession. But there are many that weren't used to that and haven't got a lot of experience of that. So I found that the way I had to deal with that was just to try and be open with people and say, at the moment, there is absolutely no intention for this program team to go anywhere. The project delivery professionals we've got are presumably going to be needed for the next program of change that the new government are going to introduce. How many people that's going to impact, I don't know. But then it's things like finding out the information that they need to hear, like the fact that the government at the moment has got a shortfall of project delivery professionals, and the government isn't going to shed project delivery professionals when they can use them elsewhere. So it's providing people with that information while the uncertainty is there. The other thing I try to do is I've never actually watched Fight Club, but I'm more than aware that there is a mantra around that, which is first rule of Fight Club. And I try to institute first rule of Change Club, which is say what you know, say what you don't know. So I've always said to my team what I do know, and I've tried to be as open and honest about what I know to be shared. But I've always told them what I don't yet know, with obviously the follow up that I'll go and do my best to find out. As soon as I know, I'll share it. So that ratio of what you know and don't know changes over time, and so I've tried to instill that as a way of working within the team, and that's been appreciated. The other thing, I suppose, is just to allow people to feel that they can come to you and talk to you when they're feeling that they're worried and they're anxious, and just trying to be able to be available so that they have the chance to just sound off, because you're right, some of this is emotional. I mean, other things we have done as within the directorate is We've actually done things like away days. That didn't happen up until about a couple of years ago. Also in the webinar was our ex-program director Gordon Woods, and when he joined the program as part of that first push for bringing in project delivery professionals after the first NISTA review we had, GATE review we had, he instituted all directorate away days as part of the team building, that trying to find that single mission and vision and focus and the sense of being one team. And that's very much been helpful emotionally to people. They found that belonging to that community, feeling part of that community has helped when perhaps there's been uncertainty as to what exactly their responsibilities are going to be in the longer term. And they felt that they've had a home really in which they've been able to express themselves and some of their concerns and anxieties into that context.
Yeah, that's great. So just sort of recognizing that is a potential issue right up front, and providing that means for people to to express it, and to go through that thought process as to what they will do when they're ready to move on to something after the project or program, even if it's just the next iteration or somewhere else in government or elsewhere. I think that sounds really a really useful approach. I really liked your Fight Club. We'll have to put perhaps a link to the film in the show notes. But it's the first rule is not to mention it. But your first rule of change is almost the opposite, which is to mention it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. That my experience of change management, where being involved in implementing change with a high degree of uncertainty, is that in the absence of information, people will make up their own version of what's likely to happen. And invariably, what they make up is far worse than what could ever happen. So
right. Rumors people can generate can be very, very creative and very imaginative. So, and it's often very, very far from the reality. So it's always important to say what you do know and what is the reality. And I'd admit if there are still things that are open questions, that the answers to those will come, but you can't give those answers today. And I think we've been very fortunate where I work, in as much that the tiers of management above me, the two tiers of management above me that directly manage the team that I'm a part of, in which our programs are delivered, they have adopted that approach of, we will tell you what we can, and we'll go and find out what we don't. So that's assisted in the trickle down of that information.
Yeah, and that being clear about what you don't know just puts it out there, rather than people feeling they're not being told, because you do know it, and what you know is not great. So hence the rumours start to riff off of that. So good top tip there, I think, for many of us.
The other thing I did it's not directly well-being, but it does have a play to how people were feeling once we got to the end of the program. And I've really pushed learning and development. So I've really pushed, as I said earlier, what I consider to be entry-level professionals to bettering themselves in terms of their knowledge. They've done a lot of, they've done a lot of development, self-development. We have an accreditation scheme within government that's still quite young, but I've pushed them all towards that so that they can see that their knowledge as project delivery professionals is improving. They can apply that knowledge into their experience, and therefore they grow confidence. And I've very much sold the vision as their leader, if you like, of wanting to make project delivery professionals that can make project delivery professionals of project delivery professionals, so that even if they go and work somewhere else, they're taking that new knowledge and then they are positively infecting those they find there and giving them and sharing that knowledge. So they become, if you like, the evangelists of project delivery for others. And I think the people I work with, they like that idea of being able to get that development, seeing themselves progress through the accreditation scheme that we've got, and recognise that they do have that skill that is valuable to government, even if it might not be exactly here.
It's almost like that butterfly effect of good practice sort of rippling around the various organisations. So the last discussion point that came from the seminar was understanding that, again, it's referenced in our No More Heroes report on the profile of successful major project leaders. but we do recognise there that perhaps the leader that helps get the major project or program to to the start line may well be different to the leader that then delivers it. And one of the things that we discussed on the seminar is whether the leader that gets it over the line might be a different sort of leader than the one that's got them to the finish line. And so we had a bit of a discussion around the language that's used in sport, often around finishers. So rather than having substitutes on the substitute bench, they're called finishers, and the coach will bring the finisher on at the right point in the game state, as the game is closing out. And it's sort of fairly typical in I think in US sport, particularly with American football. But we've seen it applied in rugby, and I know you're a big rugby fan, Mark. I'm not, but some of the ideas from rugby, and in particular Eddie Jones with his time at England with finishers, that's been applied in the club that I support, Arsenal, with Mikel Arteta has been talking about it in the last year, but he uses the term impactors, which is players coming on to make that impact. Again, I don't think there was a universal view on the seminar as to whether having someone come and get it over the finish line, or whether the person that's sort of taken it there, should see it over the finish line. But there's certainly it's food for thought, isn't it, as to whether some projects might merit it and others might not.
Yeah, and we used sort of a hybrid, to be quite frank. So I suppose as the one person on the programme that had at the working level any experience of having closed projects and programmes previously. I mean, I did that in the Royal Mail all those years ago. And having now looked at what the civil service would be expected to do, I was the one, if you like, that could oversee that. But I delegated that to one of our project managers. So one of our project managers became dedicated for the last few months on the programme of doing nothing more than getting everything in order, ready to close it at the end of March 2025. So we sort of had that responsibility between us. So you could call us, I suppose, the finishers off the bench in that sense. Certainly, it's not been beyond my experience to see the leadership of a program or a project change over the life cycle. You find that people, when you're trying to work out what is the actual requirement and the ambition of the project, there are some people who are very, very good at that, and therefore they sit at the front end and they lead the front end, and then you have others that have skills for delivery and they might come in and help with the implementation phase. So the leadership sort of hands over in that way. So there's no reason why, again, leadership shouldn't perhaps swap at the back end of the program or project when you have those specific closure responsibilities. I think, though, it depends on the circumstance. In our world, I think I was introducing some ideas were quite new to some of my colleagues. It wasn't what they have seen on a consistent basis. In fact, one or two were quite surprised that they actually were watching something get closed in an orderly way for the first time in their working experience. But I think you've got to play and understand your audience and what skills have you got available, and maybe it does make sense asking somebody who can come in and do that for you. But as I say, we sort of had a halfway house in our particular instance.
Yeah, there must be perhaps something in the psyche of those that like, to stay to the end and get it over the line. I did notice, Mark, on your LinkedIn profile, you used the language of completing and finishing quite a lot. So in the sort of summaries of each of your roles, you don't describe the things you launched. You mostly describe the things you completed. Which so there must be some sort of underlying sort of
that's probably true. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, I mean, that's where the focus is. Have you delivered? And I like to remind myself of those things that you deliver, because you see something tangible at the end of the journey, and you feel that you've contributed to that, so it gives you that sense of accomplishment. Well, that's what I find, I suppose. So yes, you're right. When you do Belbin, I always come out as a complete finisher. Absolutely.
Brilliant. And so, bringing up that sort of completer finisher Belbin, then we better think about closing this podcast. What I would like to do then, Mark, is thank you for your time. Firstly, for the seminar and the input you provided and the discussions that triggered when we gathered all the people to discuss what value we can gain from major projects, but then we've got sort of double our value, haven't we? That we brought you back for another session to continue those discussions. So thanks for your original input, and thank you doubly for taking a bit more time with us to share some of your insights with members from across the MPA today. So thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.
So that's it for today's podcast. We often say we like to make it around the duration of a regular commute or a long dog walk. Hope we've delivered on that, and we do hope to see you at our upcoming seminars. So look forward to seeing you there.